You were able to follow all that last material and we're ready for the next subject. All right, so we looked there at a sampling of the evidence for the existence of God. Now, a few decades ago in this country, the subject would have been closed at that point. After you know that God exists, you know which God exists, right? That would have been obvious. Because Americans were by and large Christian in their orientation, and so whenever you had evolution and naturalism challenging that all of a sudden, when you dealt with evolution and naturalism, I think it was natural for people to go back to the faith that they had long had in the biblical model. But now we've had pluralism taught in this country for so many decades that we get the question a lot at AP, well, okay, so God exists, but how do you know which God? We get this question a lot. So there's a God, but how come it couldn't be Allah or Buddha? And how could anybody come to know which God exists if they were born and raised in some far-off, non-Christian country where they even outlaw Bibles? How can somebody come to the conclusion of which God exists, that it's specifically the God of the Bible? Well, first of all, we'd immediately disagree with a scenario. We know that God's providence will allow anyone who hungers and thirsts for righteousness to be filled. And anyone who knocks, the door is going to be open, right? Matthew 5:6, Matthew 7:7-8. But that said, and so that implies then that these people in these other countries, if they're really sincerely truth seekers, they're going to be able to find the truth, and through God's providence. But that said, we can certainly envision scenarios today where people are born in non-Christian homes and simply don't have a ready access to a Bible or Christian discussion and thought. So how can such people come to know that it is specifically the God of the Bible that is the true God? And that's an important question, and I think it's a valid question that we need to be ready to deal with. The first line of response from God can be heard on that question without even opening a Bible, merely by having the reasoning abilities and thinking capabilities that we have. And so understand, again, we're approaching this from now the understanding that we know that there is a God. There's something outside of the box. So the question now is, what is outside of the box? So without even opening the Bible, there's some things that you can come to know about the Creator just by studying the creation. Remember Romans 1:20. You can come to know that God exists, and even you can come to know some things about God, His eternal power and Godhead. That's something you can learn about by studying the creation. So notice, without even opening a Bible, there's some information that you can get just by looking at the Creator. Can we learn something about the Creator from what is created? Something about His qualities, His characteristics. Can you learn something about, for example, a clothes designer from the clothes that he or she designs? Can you learn something about a clothes designer? Now, let's say the clothes are immodest or they're gaudy. Does that say something about the clothes designer? Can you know something about a car designer by looking at the car that they design? Sometimes, whether they're an environmentalist or something, can you glean some things about the designer by looking at what they design? Or can you know something about parents by looking at their children and how they behave? Can that tell you something about the values that parents have? Sometimes, right? Now, obviously, you can't learn everything, just like we can't learn everything that God requires of us simply by looking at nature. You can't know about baptism from that. But apparently, we can learn some things about the nature of God by looking at the creation, and we would expect that we could. So then it would stand to reason that you could compare the qualities of nature's God with the qualities of claimed gods, and let's start eliminating some false gods. Again, without even having a Bible. Now, granted, that isn't always easy. You're sifting through the evidence and trying to determine what characterizes the Creator. Because at this point, from a Christian perspective, we know that Satan's been at work corrupting things, and humans have made a mess along the way, and yet we still know Romans 1:20 was written thousands of years after all of that began, and it still says you can know something about the Creator from the creation. From Romans 1:20, we can see that our intuition helps us to sift out truth and error, because we know a lot about the natural world merely by living in it. So not knowing certain things simply by examining the created order is inexcusable according to this passage again. So if someone claimed, for example, that Satan, as the Bible describes him, is actually the creator. Now you could assess that just by looking at the creation and see that doesn't make sense. You know, a person that has a pretty broad perspective on the world and understands what the Bible teaches about Satan would likely immediately be skeptical about the idea that God could actually be Satan, because we see too many things that wouldn't come from such a selfish being. We got too many blessings and joys and happiness and freedoms, and we have free will to do what we want. We're not just totally slaves to do whatever the Creator expects of us. Whereas if you've got this holy, selfish, unloving, uncaring God, it doesn't jive with what you see in the created order. So the primary question, of course, is, can the characteristics of a particular God be harmonized with what we see in nature? And so inconsistencies may come up that might still be able to be harmonized with the evidence, and so you have to use caution. If the inconsistency is fixed, it still doesn't necessarily mean that that God is the true God, but it at least helps us to eliminate some concepts of God. I'll talk about this a little bit more. So notice, this is something anybody in any country can do without a Bible. They can use their ability to reason and to compare the God or gods of their family to what they see around them in the created order and see if it makes sense. And amazingly, what you're going to find is some gods that humans have come up with don't even claim to have the characteristics that the created order and therefore what is implied by the Creator has. They just don't line up in an obvious way. Now, so, for example, what do we see about the Creator from the universe? Number one, the Creator has to be all-powerful. Had to have the strength, the power to place everything in the universe after creating. So he's infinite. Anything in the universe that could be done was done by this Creator, power-wise. So any God who isn't all-powerful is not the Creator. So Buddhism doesn't even claim an omnipotent God, and neither do the Greek and Roman gods of mythology. The God of the Bible claims to be omnipotent, Revelation 19:6, Romans 1:20. So he can do anything which can rationally be done. And Romans 1:20 indicates that God's omnipotence is one direct characteristic that can be gleaned from studying the creation. Number two, we know that the Creator, whoever it is has all knowledge. And so I think about, when kids start out in school from a young age, and they're learning a little bit about a lot of things, and then they get a little bit older, and they learn more about fewer subjects, and you keep that. It's kind of this pyramid thing. And by the time they get to high school, they've got these certain subjects they're learning a lot about, but there are fewer subjects than they have when they were younger. You go on to college, and you pick a field that's, again, smaller than what you were doing in high school. You're learning a lot more about this field. If you go on to the graduate level, you're learning more than anybody else in one little tiny thing. And then you go on to the doctoral level, and you're learning, everything that nobody else has learned anything that you have on this tiny little thing in the universe, this little infinitesimal aspect of the universe. And you have to imagine the Creator already knows all that. He created it. And so he basically has an infinite number of PhDs. So the Creator, whoever the Creator is, has to be omniscient. Anything that can be known about this universe that was created by the Creator has to know. Okay, so again you think, all right, the Greek and Roman gods, for example, don't even claim omniscience. They don't harmonize, they don't jive with what you see in creation. The God of the Bible, again, claims to be omniscient, 1 John 3:20. He knows everything. Number three, he's all present. So he's large enough to place things billions of light years away, and he's even in the future and in the past. He's set apart from time. He has to be the Creator, whoever it is, because the Creator had to create time itself. And so this being can't be subject to time, because time has to have been created as well. So it helps to fathom how the Bible, the depiction of God in the Bible is that he can know the future so perfectly, because he's already there. He's not even subject to time. And so again, you think about some of the religions out there. Buddhism, again, doesn't even claim an omnipresent God. The God of the Bible claims to be omnipresent, Psalm 139, 7 through 10. He's everywhere. The eyes of the Lord are at every place, keeping watch on the evil and the good, Proverbs 15, verse 3. For God will bring every work into judgment, including every secret thing, whether good or evil, Ecclesiastes 12:14. He's also, the Bible describes him as not just everywhere, but every when. 1 Timothy 1:16 and 17, he's eternal. He's immortal. The words I am are used throughout the Bible to denote Jehovah. It's not I was or I will be, it's I am, this ever-present being, omnipresent, not only everywhere, every when. Number 4, you can see that the Creator, whoever it is fair and just and unbiased and unprejudiced by looking at the creation. So because, for example, we can see that everyone can receive blessings and receive suffering. Everyone has the potential to strive for and achieve desires, regardless of their sex, regardless of their race, their beauty, their power, their strength, their money, their status. Now, so the Creator could have created the universe in such a way that only certain people just naturally would receive suffering and others wouldn't. Maybe they would only receive blessings or something. Could have done that, but that's not what you see in the created order. The Creator made the creation in such a way that anyone has the potential for blessings and curses. Now, humans can step in and tamper with that created order because they've been given free will, and so they might do things that cause injustices and sufferings for some and not others. And the Creator again allows that because of another one of his attributes. But humans, so humans might do things that cause advantages or disadvantages, but notice, those aren't inherent in the actual creation itself. Freedom is inherent, which has the potential to cause advantages and disadvantages for others when humans exercise those freedoms. But the Creator chose to create a system where everyone is born naked and dies and leaves all their physical possessions behind. Everybody gets this the same way. The nature of the creation is such that apparently all humans are equal, which is why I think the founders got this idea, and that's why they placed that statement into the Declaration of Independence. It's fundamental to nature. We're equal. A king is not actually of more value than a slave. Those advantages and disadvantages are created by humans, not the Creator. And so notice also that from a young age, again, we understand this idea of fairness as though it's programmed into us by the Creator. Remember, a 3-year-old knows if someone comes and takes his toy, it's not fair. He knows that. The Creator must be interested in that fairness. For that child to already get that. Fairness seems to be important to the Creator. But notice that there are religions that claim that the Creator is partial and prejudiced and unfair and biased. Islam is very sexist towards women. Looks at them as inferior, and they're treated basically like cattle. Surah 434 says, men are in charge of women because Allah hath made the one of them to excel the other, and because they spend of their property for the support of women. So good women are the obedient, guarding in secret that which Allah hath guarded. As for those from whom you fear rebellion, admonish them, advance them to beds apart, and scourge them. Husbands, I think you ought to try that tonight, see how that goes. And then if they obey you, seek not a way against them. Lo, Allah is ever high, exalted, great. All right, so can that idea be harmonized with the God of nature? I think of the God of Calvinism, who shows partiality. Some people are going to be saved unconditionally. They're predestined to salvation, regardless of their behavior. Others won't. That doesn't jive with what we see in the created order. That kind of God is not what you see. It doesn't jive. That's a totally unfair God. Naturalism is a religion of its own, implicitly worshiping man and Mother Earth. The Bible of naturalism is Darwin's Origin of Species, I would say. The actual title of the book was The Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, or The Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life. See, Darwin believed that Caucasians are more advanced in evolution. And so in his book, The Descent of Man, he argued that the more advanced civilized races, he thought, like the Caucasians, are going to be selected to survive, and the other races would eventually become extinct. And so he argued that also that the average of mental power in man must be above that of woman. Man has ultimately become superior to woman. So naturalists, look, it's not me saying it, okay? This is what they believe. So naturalists believe in an unjust, sexist creation. But are women really inferior to men? Haven't we figured out that's not true? And are whites really superior to blacks? Of course not. We understand the genetics of this. That's a ridiculous argument. So we totally understand this is not true. The very idea contradicts the evidence from science and nature. The Creator appears to be just and impartial. Without even a Bible, you can see that. We all have the ability to have blessings, and all are guaranteed suffering and pain if we violate His even natural laws. So again, one might bring up quibbles here and there against a certain concept of God, or of the God of various religions. And then the question comes, well, can that conception of a God still be harmonized with the evidence? So if I was from another culture and raised in a home where another God was worshipped, would I be able to harmonize what I see in nature with the concept of my God? And again, it can be complicated, no doubt, but any concept of God that isn't the true God is simply not going to be able to be harmonized with the evidence. Now, does the God of the Bible harmonize with that concept? The God of the Bible is described as just and fair, Psalm 7:11. He doesn't show partiality, Acts 10:34, Deuteronomy 10:17. He doesn't judge according to outward appearance, 1 Samuel 16:7. He's not biased or prejudiced. He's the author of salvation to all who obey Him, Hebrews 5:9. Jew, Greek, slave, free, male, female, Galatians 3:28. So any accusation against His justice has not been able to be sustained once examined critically. Number 5, the Creator is loving and caring and unselfish, concerned for His creation. He's not a deistic God, right? So people that believe in deism believe that there is a Creator, but He basically created it, and He's just got a hands-off approach. He went out somewhere and He gave coffee, and good luck. That's kind of their mentality. But that's not what we see when we look at the creation. So I think of even our immune systems, reparative systems that promote health. That shows concern for the creation. He provides foods that are good for us and foods that taste good. You see beauty. Imagine if the Creator thought, it's going to make everything gray. Everything's gray. That's all there is. And the Creator could have done that. But instead, He chose to give us things that are attractive to us, in beauty and diversity. I think about everybody has the opportunity to advance and grow in their mind and learning. How many people are involved in that just because we just love to learn. We love to gain knowledge. It's not just boring where there's nothing to learn. All we do is look at a piece of wood all day. That's just not what we see in the created order. We can receive a respite from suffering. That's another one of the things we have. We all go through suffering, but it's kind of ups and downs. But if I think about what a selfish God would do, wouldn't it be different? Imagine a selfish God making a creation. Why would He give blessings? Why wouldn't there be a lot more suffering? Now, the Creator gives pleasure, things that bring about happiness and joy, things that feel good, sound good, smell good, taste good, look good. The ability to make choices of free will. These are things that we see in the created order. Now, we think about a selfish, unloving, uncaring God. What if Satan were God? Well, would it be more like a dictatorship? We just don't have choices. We'd be more like robots. No freedom, complete control, no free will, no blessings, maybe just pain, nothing good. No giving, just taking. There's total selfishness. No concern for the creation. In other words, the Creator would be more like the Roman and Greek gods that humans have come up with. But again, that's not what we see. God of the Bible harmonizes with what you see in creation. Acts 14:17 says, He didn't leave Himself without witness, and that He did good, gave us rain from heaven, fruitful seasons, filling our hearts with food and gladness. The blessings of His creation witness to His existence and His loving nature. Rain, fruitful seasons with their beauty, even our ability again to appreciate beauty. Food and the fact that He gave ability to us to enjoy food and the ability to have gladness, which wasn't necessary. He didn't have to do that. It shows his concern and his love for us. He's not a selfish God. He cares for others. He's the essence of love, according to the Bible. It's harmonized perfect with the Bible. He is the essence of love and unselfishness, 1 John 4, 7 and 8. He cares so much, of course, that we know that he gave himself to his own creation to abuse and mistreat, slaughter, right? That is the epitome of unselfishness. Notice also a degree of mercy seems to be worked into the created order. You do something terrible or unnatural, it won't necessarily bring about immediate physical retribution. You may get another chance. You may get mercy. You do something completely unwise and imprudent. It may not necessarily bring consequences to you. You may get a second chance. Now again, you got to think in terms of, if it was an unmerciful creator, there wouldn't be such thing as second chances. You make an unwise decision, you die. Why would there be mercy if you're an unmerciful God? But the Creator chose to create the planet in such a way that you get second chances, and we get mercy constantly. So does mercy harmonize with the gods of the world? And it's, again, certainly not all of them. So notice, these are kind of characteristics, and there's many others we could talk about that you can see in creation without even opening a Bible or any book, and you can start figuring out, is this really jive? So I think that's fascinating, that God made it where a person, no matter where they are in the world, can get to a certain place in their knowledge to come to know there's something that doesn't work with what I've been taught. And that causes them to search. And then God will providentially make sure everybody gets an opportunity to hear the truth. Matthew 5:6, Matthew 7:7-8. So we can study the nature, we can study the creation, learn about the Creator, and compare those qualities to the alleged gods of the world, and that can help you to weed out other gods. Now there's another way, though, that we can approach this subject. It's, I think, a more direct route to answer this question. It'd be a lot easier if you're talking to someone, to be able to answer it this way. A few years ago, I was in Russellville, Arkansas, and I was presenting some of my evolution stuff, and as happens at times, so biology individuals, graduate students, and professors like to show up and come up and beat up on me for a while. And so that's fun. It's a lot of fun. I really enjoy that. It's one of my favorite things in life. So anyway, one of these biology professors came up, and he, had one of these looks on his face, right? So here we go. Here comes one of his little gotcha moments. And this professor, I was told afterwards there are some people in the congregation that had his class at Arkansas Tech, and he's one of these professors that'll, at the beginning of his class, at the beginning of the semester, he'll say, raise your hand if you don't believe in evolution, you believe in the Bible and creation. A few hands go up. He said, by the end of this semester, I'll show you that evolution is true and you guys are a bunch of idiots, the Bible's wrong. He's one of these guys, just a rabbit. So he came up and said, well, let's say you're right, that evolution is false and that there is a God. You still haven't shown, you still haven't proven which God exists. How come it couldn't be Allah? Or how come it couldn't be the flying spaghetti monster? He actually said that. Apparently there's a group of individuals that, as a way to scoff at Christianity, they've made a group called the Pastafarians that believe in the flying spaghetti monster because they think there's just as much evidence, they say, for the flying spaghetti monster as there is the God of the Bible. And so they think that's real funny. Well, and so when I responded to him with this second answer that you could give to people that ask that question. You can determine which God is the creator by studying the materials that claim to be from God. So determining which is the truth and then learning about who that God is based on those materials. So from studying creation, for example, you can see that the Creator cares about His creation. So it would be expected that He would have communicated with His creation and not just hung us out to dry. So sink or swim on your own. So think about even the parent-child relationship, which is, throughout the earth. He didn't have to do that, right? But He created this parent-child relationship in which important information is passed from parent to child. And then, so something about that, is there anything we can learn about the Creator from that? And the answer is yes. We would expect the Father of the creation to want to pass on information to us. So there's implications to that. I would predict that whoever the creator is had to have tried to write to us something. And so what you find out is there's really not all that many materials out there that even claim to be from the creator. There's really just a handful. And yet we would expect that the creator would have tried to communicate with us just again by looking at his creation. So we can look at the materials that claim to be from the creator and see if they have divine qualities, characteristics that humans could not have produced, that only an omniscient being could produce. So I want to repeat that. This is a key concept that I think we need to have the wording on this memorized for. Does a book or material have qualities which humans could not have produced? Divine characteristics. So if humans produce the materials, there are certain things you would expect, because we're not omniscient. You might expect contradictions and flaws and inconsistencies, because humans can make mistakes. You'd expect a human author who's secretly writing a book and it not being God, and you just want to try to fool everybody. And you would expect that individual that's trying to deceive his readers. You'd expect certain things from that. You'd expect, again, errors. If there's a human writing a book, you'd expect some kind of inconsistencies. But if the creator is the author of something, we've already seen, again, that the creator has to be all-knowing and all-powerful, so you would expect whatever he authored to be flawless and have things in it that humans simply could not have known or written, right? That's something we'd expect. So an example of how we can determine if a human wrote something and tried to deceive everyone into believing it was from God. Okay, here's an example. If the creator wanted to communicate with mankind, would we expect him to communicate with his audience in its language? That's something you'd expect? So if God wanted to talk to you, would you expect him to speak to you in some language you don't know? He starts talking to you in Russian or something, No, of course he wouldn't expect that. He'd expect him to talk to you in your language. So if he's writing to 21st century Americans, would he use Australian English? Now, why would he do that? He wouldn't have, that's a different dialect. Would he use UK English? That's different. Is that something you'd expect? No, we wouldn't expect that. Does this seem obvious to you? Would he use English from medieval times? You expect him to do that? I mean, that was English too, but it's changed a lot, hasn't it? No, he wouldn't do that, right? If the creator wanted to communicate with mankind, obviously he'd communicate with us using our language and our dialect. And that's what he did, and that's what the Bible creator did, right? So the Old Testament was Hebrew and Aramaic, depending upon who was receiving the information at the time. In the New Testament, it's the Koine Greek. That's what the language was in that area. So that's what it worked. That's who the audience was for, so that's what was used. All right, now, the King James Version translation of the Bible, the translation into English back in 1611. Excellent translation, even 400 years later. But with that in mind, we keep in mind what it is and what it isn't, so that we're not caught off guard by skeptics and deceived like the religion I want to talk about for a moment. Language has changed a lot in 400 years, right? Words and phrases change meaning, words sometimes even lose meaning altogether. So for example, you look at the King James and you see the Old English used, right? Art forth ye thou thy forsooth, right? That kind of language, not really used today. That was used back then. Eventually it stopped being used in society, except in the King James Bible. That's where you would see it, because the King James was translated in 1611, and that's what everybody used. That was a translation still being used even 200 years later in the 1800s. By the 1800s, apparently the only place language like that continued to be used was in association with religious matters, God and the church, because the King James was the primary version still being used after 200 years, right? So you read literature from that 1800s time period, and you see the Old English has been abandoned. I think of the Declaration of Independence. It doesn't have that. That kind of language is gone. Okay, so over the years, many people would have, I think, subconsciously begun to associate 17th century, 1600s English with God and religion, right? That would just, I think, naturally start happening to people. So it appears that to many it began to be thought of as its own special religious, even inspired English dialect. As though if God wanted to talk to them in the 1800s, he would use the 1600s English. Right? It's because that's God's language, right? Thee, thou, forth. You know, as though the King James was actually inspired by God himself. We know that's not true, right? God did not write in English. So now this must be the case, or millions of people wouldn't have been so easily duped by Joseph Smith. So in actuality, of course, God did not use Old English terminology when he transmitted the Bible to us through the Bible writers in the first century and before. He used Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek, which we don't use the Old Englishisms, right? If you know Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek, you're going to see you, thou, forth, ye art. That's not a part of those languages. That is 1600s English. That's it. So those are simply, by the way, in the 1600s, that was simply the singular forms of our words. We lump, whether it's singular or plural, just the word you. I can say you and it'd be plural, or I can say you and it'd be singular, and it's still the same word. Well, the 1600s, they separated. It was actually kind of a handy thing. Whenever you're trying to interpret things in the Bible, and sometimes it's handy to, thankfully in the Bible, it does distinguish between singular and plural. That's another thing. So for example, in 2 Samuel 12:7, Nathan, remember, is confronting David for his sin with Bathsheba and Uriah. And Nathan speaking to David, so Nathan's talking to David. David's a single man. What does the King James render? Anybody know what the King James rendering there is? Thou art the man, right? Well, again, that's how they would have said it, how the English would have been translated in the 1600s. The New King James says, you are the man, right? That's how we would say it today. Now, here's why this is important. The Book of Mormon was translated in 1830, over 200 years after the King James, by Joseph Smith, and he claimed it was with God's guidance. That this was a supernatural translation. Okay, so throughout the Book of Mormon, the Old English was used. And so you can pull this up. You can pull up the Book of Mormon from back then, whenever he claimed to have gotten this translation, and use it. I just looked at the first 9 or 10 pages and just started marking down how much it's loaded, even probably more than the King James. It's just saturated with this kind of language. Thou on page 7, 8, and 9. Thee on page 7 and 9. Ye on page 9. Spake, page 9. Mightest, page 8. Thine, page 6. Commandeth, page 10. Thou hast, page 9. Taketh, page 1. Saith, page 7. And so again, you go to bookofmormononline.net and you can go look at this yourself and see it's just saturated with the Old English. So why would God translate the Book of Mormon in the 19th century with old 17th century English instead of using 19th century American English? Well, we've already answered the question. He wouldn't. For the same reason that he wouldn't speak to us today in Australian English or medieval English. He wouldn't do that. He would use our dialect. So why does the Book of Mormon contain the Old English dialect? Apparently Joseph Smith wanted to give his translation credibility, and it worked. It sounded like God's Word. And so it must be God's Word. It worked. See, because people were thinking, oh, thee, thou, thy. I mean, that's how God talks. And so you got to have that in your translation. No, they just don't understand the translation process. That's all that's going on. And so he duped all these people with this. Religious people would be more likely to believe in his book by making it sound like the holy, inspired dialect of the King James. And so he used it. In fact, the Book of Mormon contains over 17,000 words straight from the King James. I mean, it just takes entire sections, even places that we now have enough manuscripts to know would be better translated different ways. He just took it all and dumped it into the Book of Mormon and give it credibility. So his ruse worked, and it continues to work with the millions of gullible people that profess to be Mormon. So the Book of Mormon proves itself to be of human origin, not divine. And so this is just one example of the kind of flaws. And again, if we were to make a prediction, if humans wrote something and they wanted to pawn it off on us, that's what you'd expect. That's exactly what you would expect if that was the case. And you can do the same thing with other materials that claim to be of divine origin. and they could be studied to detect whether they appear to be from humans duping the masses or from a divine being. You can do this with the Quran. It's riddled with similar issues. Again, probably due to Muhammad's desire to lend credibility to the Quran, it copies liberally from the Jewish Talmud. And you study into this, you'll see it's obvious. I mean, a lot of the stuff in the Quran came from the Jewish Talmud. The problem is, the Talmud is this collection of Jewish fables, myths, and stories that were circulating during Muhammad's time, and yet it's not even claimed to be inspired by the Jews. The Talmud is from the Jews, and they don't even claim it to be inspired. But he probably wouldn't have known that when he heard the Talmud stories from the Jews. And so he borrowed the tales from the Talmud and added them to the Quran to give him more credibility in his attempts to persuade people in that area to follow him. So again, the Quran proves itself to be of human origin. Now the Bible, on the other hand, contains characteristics which prove it to be above humankind. You probably studied a lot of this material before, but just let's rehash a little bit of it from this perspective, since we're trying to show you how to answer this question from this line of thinking. Make sure we understand the application to this question. So first of all, we look at the Bible and we see unity. Would we expect 40 different writers that are men from these diverse backgrounds? You've got a king, a scribe, a farmer, fisherman, tax collector, shepherd, Gentile physician, tree doctor, prophet, tent maker, soldier, etc. 40 men from those kind of backgrounds spread out over 1,600 years, writing in 3 different languages, to be able to agree on the things discussed in the Bible without contradicting or disagreeing with each other. Is that something we would expect? I mean, get 40 people in a room and try to get them to decide where to go eat lunch. Right? These guys are discussing, heavy topics. The afterlife, the meaning of life, right and wrong. Are we not in a huge debate with everybody over this in the world? They talk about this stuff in perfect agreement. Politics, economics, medicine, psychology, philosophy, history, grammar, science, logic, the future, and so forth, in perfect harmony with each other on these things. Would you expect humans to be able to do that? No, that would be a divine characteristic. What about brevity and omissions? Would we expect humans to write about such things that we looked at here in a brief enough way that all of it could be printed into one relatively small book that you could carry around in a purse? Is that what humans do when we write on those subjects? No way. We are notoriously verbose, right? I'm sitting here preaching for I don't know how long. I'm just talking away. And they handle this stuff. They can handle this stuff rapidly. Would we expect humans to leave out the bulk of Jesus' childhood? Aren't you, as a human, curious about Jesus' childhood? There's a lot of stuff that, what was Jesus doing? Remember that kid came over and took his toy. What did he do to him? Don't you wonder stuff like that? Well, the Catholics came along and wrote some books to try to answer those questions, right? But they don't even claim they're inspired. So humans, those are the kind of things we want to put in there, but they're omitted. It's not there. Would we expect humans to squeeze the momentous events of the first 30 years of the church history into one small book, the book of Acts? Is that something humans would do? Would you expect humans to give the meaning of life in a mere 12-chapter book? The book of Ecclesiastes, right? Little book, meaning of life. Or explain the origin of the universe in one chapter. I tell you what, I would love to see a much bigger treatise on that subject, wouldn't you? That's humans. Like if I was going to pawn something off on the world, I'm going to spend some time on some subjects that are really neat to me, right? But that's not what you see in the Bible. It's as though there's this governing hand restraining the normal inclinations of human beings to ensure that it's exactly what needs to be in there and not more. So it's not too much. It's exactly what we need. And it's right to the point, not wordy and repetitive, except in those things that he wants to really emphasize. How about the objectivity of the Bible? Would you expect humans to write disparaging, comments about themselves or each other for the whole world to read over the coming centuries that cast them in a bad light? And to do so completely dispassionately and impartially, without emotion. Again, that's not very human. Without any defense or anything. Just, he did this. Man's like, oh man, he did that? That's what we're thinking. What, he did that? And you put that in there? Why did you hide that? Well, that's because they weren't really the ones writing it. Scientific foreknowledge. We expect humans to be able to state several of the laws of science accurately before science even progressed to the point of understanding them. And we see that. We see lots of the laws of science in the Bible. So let's look at a few of the amazing features of the Bible with regard to the scientific foreknowledge that prove the Bible to be above human capability. Again, things that you've probably heard before, not necessarily in conjunction with this idea. How can you know which God exists? So in the area of medicine, Genesis 17:12, you probably noticed, says, "He was 8 days old among you shall be circumcised, every male child in your generations." And then again in Leviticus 12:3, "If a woman is conceived and born a male child, on the 8th day the flesh of his foreskin shall be circumcised." So, why the 8th day? What's significant about the 8th day? I think about the fact that to Jews, numbers were a big deal, right? They put a lot of stock in certain numbers. Okay, so circumcision is a big deal to the Jew, right? You see that in the Bible. This is a huge deal. So if you were going to select a particular day just for a symbolic meaning, what day do you think you might pick? Wouldn't I? Probably the 7th day, right? It's the perfect number. So why day 8? What's the significance of that? Well, we dig into the science on this. This guy, Henrik Dam, is a Danish scientist from 100 years ago, and so he discovered vitamin K in his studies, and this is what he found. Vitamin K is in foods, and it helped to make it where baby chicks didn't hemorrhage, didn't bleed out whenever they got cut or something. Got a Nobel Prize for it in 1943. So blood clotting depends on the production of prothrombin by the liver. And vitamin K stimulates the liver to produce prothrombin. So to make it where you can blood clot more and not bleed out. So if you have a vitamin K deficiency, there's going to be a prothrombin deficiency and hemorrhaging may occur. You're going to have problems with bleeding. All right, now this guy, Emmett Holt, comes along and discovers, and he's one of the pioneers of pediatric medicine, he comes along and finds there's a peculiar susceptibility to bleeding between the 2nd and 5th days of life. Now, you think that's an important thing to know? If you're going to pick which day to circumcise a boy? Don't you want to know that? If you're going to do some surgery and you don't have the abilities we have today, that's something you need to know. Day 2 through 5 is not good. Vitamin K production and absorption in the newborn male increases on the 5th through 8th day of life. And so here's a chart here that shows the growth of prothrombin in the first 8 days of a child's life. So between age 2 through 5, you've got an increased susceptibility for bleeding. And then you start seeing the prothrombin going up, the vitamin K going up over days 5 through 8. And then notice, only on the 8th day is the case that vitamin K causes the percent of prothrombin to climb above 100%. This is the only day on the male's life that happens, and then it levels back down to 100%. The only day in the entire life of a boy that the blood clotting element prothrombin peaks above 100% is day 8. It is literally the best day to perform circumcision in ancient times. Okay, so how did Moses know that? Do you think it was trial and error? Right? You think he just butchered baby boys until he figured that out? Well, that's ridiculous. Of course not. And the answer is, he didn't know this. He did what he was told by this governing power that knew about vitamin K and prothrombin. And he just said, okay, on the 8th day, do it. Yes, sir, we'll do. Okay, now we come along and figure out, day 8's important. So, you don't circumcise on day 8 now. So how are we pulling that off? You get a vitamin K injection when you're younger. That's how you get circumcised early. How about in oceanography? I think there's some fascinating things here too. Remember that same speech that God is giving to Job, highlighting to Job, you don't know what you're talking about. You don't even know. Have you entered into the springs of the sea? We know that there's springs in the depths of the ocean that are giving fresh water. Have you walked in the recesses of the deep? That idea, springs of the sea, sources, origin, fountains of gushing and bubbling water. So we've again discovered these springs in the sea. Cold freshwater springs have been found all over the world at the floor of the ocean. And Job, of course, had not entered them. Have you walked in the recesses of the deep? So these are the most secret recesses of the sea, the deep places or caverns of the ocean. So, how did he even know about those? I mean, we've discovered over the last century, sure enough, you've got some enormous trenches. In 1873, a team of British scientists initiated a deep sea exploration and found a trench on the floor of the Pacific Ocean over 5 miles deep. The Mariana Trench, located off the island of Guam, is 1,580 miles long, 43 miles wide, and then we finally developed technology to get down there. The Trieste descended the deepest point of the Mariana Trench, 35,800 feet, 8 tons of pressure per square inch. And since then, we found at least 22 trenches that have been identified all over the base of the ocean. So again, how would the writer of Job have known that the ocean even had these recesses? You think he had his own little Trieste that he could get down there to the base of the ocean and figure that out? No way. He couldn't have known unless God told him, just as the text says. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, have you entered the string of the sea or walked in the recesses of the deep? Another attribute of the Bible that proves it to be above human capability is this idea of predictive prophecy. Right? We see this important idea throughout the Bible. I think about weathermen and sportscasters. How well are they at foretelling the future, right? I mean, they're pretty bad. Sometimes I think I could do a lot better. Just guessing, I could do better than some of these guys do. In Deuteronomy 18, it says, if you say in your heart, how shall we know the word which the Lord has not spoken? When a prophet speaks in the name of the Lord, if the thing does not happen or come to pass, that is the thing which the Lord has not spoken. The prophet has spoken it presumptuously. You shall not be afraid of it. Now the Bible is very open about, look, God was like, I'm going to use predictive prophecy as a way to prove to you that what I'm telling you is the truth. That's an important thing about miracles. See, God never required a blind faith. Whenever he conveyed information to humanity through prophets, it was accompanied by a miracle to prove that it was from him. They weren't just supposed to just believe it blindly. He would perform a miracle to confirm that message. Mark 16, verse 20. So miracles confirm that what was being taught was the truth. And so he just comes out and says, look, here's one of the miracles. This is something that is not natural. If you can tell the future, that's not natural. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have prophets tell you the future, and then you can find out whether it's true or not. I'll give you the means to check out and make sure that it's me talking. You can test it by seeing if these things really do happen. All right, so that's this idea of prophecies. Now you look at Ezekiel 26. And you see, for example, this prophecy about Tyre. And you got tons of these prophecies, but I like this one about Tyre. It's just fascinating to me. And it came to pass in the 11th year on the first day of the month that the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Son of man, because Tyre has said against Jerusalem, aha, she has broken who is the gateway of the peoples. Now she is turned over to me, and I shall be filled. She is laid waste. Behold, I am against you, O Tyre, and will cause many nations to go up against you, as the sea causes its waves to come up. And they shall destroy the walls of Tyre and break down her towers. For I have spoken, says the Lord God. It shall become plunder for the nations. Also her daughter villages, which are in the field, shall be slain by the sword. Then they shall know that I am the Lord. For thus says the Lord God, Behold, I will bring against Tyre from the north Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, king of kings, with horses, with chariots, and with horsemen, and an army with many people. He will slay with the sword your daughter villages in the field. He will heap up a siege mound against you, build a wall against you, and raise a defense against you. They will break down your walls and destroy your pleasant houses. They will lay your stones, your timber, your soil in the midst of the water. That's an interesting thing to say. I'll put an end to the sound of your songs, and the sound of your harp shall be heard no more. I'll make you like the top of a rock. You shall be a place for spreading nets, and you shall never be rebuilt, for I, the Lord, have spoken, says the Lord God. So notice all of these specific prophecies that are given against Tyre in that section. Lots of little individual prophecies laid out there, including it'd be like the top of a rock, it would be the place for the spreading of nets in the midst of the sea, that stone, timbers, and soil will be thrown into the midst of the water. Now you can go back in history and look at these predictions playing out. So historically, for example, we know Ezekiel began prophesying in 592 BC. Tyre was a coastal city, and then a few years later, 586 BC, Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon besieged Tyre, just as Ezekiel said would happen, and then finally took it in 573. But many of the people of the city had escaped to a small island that was 3/4 of a mile offshore. And Nebuchadnezzar gave up taking that island militarily. So for about 241 years, that situation remained basically the same. Then in 332, Alexander the Great comes along to try to conquer the island city. But in order to take it, he had to get to it across the water. So what did he do? In order to get to the island and conquer it, he has his army gather up all of the remaining materials, the wood, the stones, even the dirt, from the inland city, just scrape it clean of materials. He takes all that material and dumps it into the ocean and makes a land bridge to this island. And you can still see this today using like Google Earth. So he makes this bridge, but the city still remained basically intact to some extent for 1,600 years. And many others came against it, the Ptolemies, the Seleucids, the Romans, the Muslim Arabs, came against the city during that time. And then finally the Mamluks, the former Muslim soldier slaves, came in AD 1291 and crushed the city of Tyre, where it has never regained the wealthy, powerful position that it once had. So Ezekiel looked 1,900 years into the future and predicted all of these things happening, one by one. And guess what? Travelers who go and visit the ancient city of Tyre today say that only a small colony of people actually live there. And guess what it is that they do for a living? They fish with nets. They fish with nets. So how in the world could Ezekiel have known that? Well, he couldn't. And again, he didn't even claim to. He only told people what he said God told him. Therefore, thus says the Lord God. So we can know that God exists. It is not a blind faith to know that there's something outside of the box, and we can know which God exists. We can know that it is specifically the God of the Bible. You can know that the Bible is from him. And you know, after you know that, it's just a matter of figuring out what, if anything, he expects of us. And that becomes a problem because we don't always like some of the things he expects from us, right? So recapping the end of that story, I told you about that professor that came up to me, and he's getting at that little gotcha moment. I could see it in his face, you know, how can you know which God exists? How come it couldn't be the flying spaghetti monster? You know, and what bothers me still to this day is that he thought that was a gotcha moment. He had dealt with people that called themselves Christians, and he'd asked that question, and he apparently was never given an answer to it. That bothers me, because this is fundamental. How do we know which God exists? So I said, wait a minute. We can know which God exists. We have a book that has characteristics that humans could not have produced. That's the phrase you need to have memorized. We have a book that has divine characteristics. And so he literally sat there with his mouth open. I can still see it. He sat there for a minute, just flummoxed. He was like, really? I said, yeah. And he sat there again for a minute. I'd like to see that. I said, you know how rare it is for us to get to that point in my line of work? It's like, you mean you want to see the Bible? No, you don't want to see the Bible. Wait. Yes, you do. I'm just like, this can't be. So I was like, well, okay, you know, we've got some material to show you what I'm talking about. And I talked to him, one of the elders jumped up real quick and bought this book for him. That's what the purpose of that book is, to explain how we can know the Bible is inspired. It has these characteristics that are above the ability of humans to have produced. He wasn't willing to buy the book. He said he didn't want to support us, but he didn't want to see what I was talking about. So he took that book. I don't know what happened to him. Hopefully he read it and became a Christian, but I don't know. But it was pretty neat moment, pretty exciting. All right, so I want to remind you again, be sure to take some time to look at those materials back there in the back. Be ready to earnestly contend for the faith as one of our responsibilities. Let me tell you a few of the things that are back there. Again, I won't tell you all of it in this session. Let's just look at some of the adult stuff that we have back there for a moment. First of all, we've got this monthly apologetics journal. So if you want to be up to date on what's going on, you know, what are the big topics that are out there, that you need to be ready to address. This is a monthly journal that comes to your house at the beginning of each month. It costs about $1 a month, so basically $1 an issue to be able to get this. And beautiful, looks good, put it on a coffee table or whatever, and definitely visitors that come over and so forth and can see it would be, I'm sure they'd be great if they pick it up and look at it themselves. So if you don't subscribe to this, I encourage you to do that. Also, we have these Christian Evidences books. So, Behold the Lamb of God. It's a fascinating book. It's answering the question, can you know that Jesus even existed historically? I mean, is Jesus just someone that was totally made up? It answers that question. And then it answers the question, well, how can you know that he is the Son of God? Because you got religions out there that claim to believe in Jesus, but don't believe that he was the Son of God. So, the Christian Evidences, you kind of have three pillars: existence of God, inspiration of the Bible, deity of Christ. So this is the third pillar in that, to make sure you're ready to discuss that subject. This one again is that the one on the inspiration of the Bible that I just talked about. These two middle ones, the Anvil Ring series, one of the typical things that people do today, when skeptics will come at you to try to discredit your view of the Bible, they'll rattle off a list of like 20 different things. Look, the Bible contradicts itself here and here and here, and they'll just give you a bunch of these. See, it says this here and it says this here. Those can't be harmonized. The Bible contradicts itself, so it's not from God. And they'll give you like 20 of those. And they're notorious for this. They do this in debates and so forth. These volumes are basically addressing every one of those that people have brought up for years and years and years and years. And it prepares you to deal with those, to show you that the Bible does not have any of those. It's one of the proofs of its inspiration. It has nothing in it that cannot be shown to be perfectly in harmony with itself. It has internal consistency in these things. We're looking at maybe doing a third volume of that. Eric Lyons is the one that's what he specializes in at AP. The Truth About Human Origins it's about this thick. I think it's the thickest book we have at AP. And it's getting more in-depth into very technical matters in evolution. It gets into the fossil record, and it gets into the origin of human consciousness and gender. How did evolutionists, evolutionists have to explain how even the origin of genders came about. And it talks about that. So lots of very technical evolution stuff. Unless you're a pretty serious apologist, I wouldn't necessarily recommend most people that you're going to get worn out going through it. But if you are majoring in science, or if you're a very, very serious apologist, that's a good one for you. This one here, whenever Kyle Butt debated Dan Barker back in, I guess it was 2009 maybe, Dan Barker brought up what I think are the main arguments that are used against the God of the Bible today. So, God is sexist. He's a homophobe. He advocated slavery. He advocated genocide. He had the Israelites come in and just wipe out an entire nation, including animals and children and everything. It's just this terrible God. It's all of this stuff that is being thrown at the God of the Bible. That was brought out in this debate. So that book is more of it gives the script of the debate, but then lots of material where Kyle could go more in depth in responding to these typical arguments that are made against the God of the Bible. So definitely a book you need to have in your library to make sure you're ready to deal with the latest attacks. They're not really new attacks, but it's cycled around again, and this is stuff that people are using. We need to be ready to deal with those. Surveying the Evidence is our flagship book on Christian Evidences. Gives you a general survey of existence of God, inspiration of the Bible, deity of Christ, creation, evolution, the age of the earth, just kind of an overall survey of Christian Evidences in those matters. Dinosaur Delusion is probably maybe my favorite of the adult books, because I just think dinosaurs are really cool. And this is the book that shows, right, if we're right, that Genesis chapter 1 is giving literal 6 days of creative activity, and that the universe is only 6,000 to 8,000 years old, and that means humans and dinosaurs were created on day 6 together. We coexisted. So is there evidence for that? Because the evolutionists would say we were separated by 63 million years. We never saw each other. And so this book looks at the evidence that humans and dinosaurs coexisted in the not too distant past. Fascinating book, answers even the quibbles that I've seen come up against that idea. Really fun book to have in your arsenal. This is my book, Science versus Evolution, which goes through and shows you there is the opposite of this seminar. It's dismantling. So what we're working on in this seminar is we're building the creation model systematically. My other seminar, I systematically dismantle the naturalistic model. So you're dealing with evolution, the Big Bang, and so forth. This book covers about half of that material that is in that other seminar, but in a much more in-depth way, including the responses that are made to our main arguments. So whenever we bring up, like I brought up thermodynamics in the previous session, to show the universe could have created itself, it could have existed forever. Well, they come back and say, well, wait a minute, quantum mechanics could do that, or zero energy balance in the universe. They come back with some technical arguments. And then it deals with those as well, which I don't generally do in seminars because it's more technical. But about half of the book is appendices dealing with the arguments that they come back at us with. So it's all stuff that you really need to be ready to deal with if you're dealing with someone that really knows their stuff in the naturalistic community. And then this is a book that we put out, I think a year and a half ago, that my dad wrote, looking at, the biggest argument that people have used against the God of the Bible over the years has been, how can you have an all-loving God and an all-powerful God, and yet there be terrible things happen to good and innocent people? So either God is not all-powerful because he's not able to stop these bad things from happening, or he's not all-loving because he's unwilling to stop these things. And so they say, hey, haha, that proves the God of the Bible cannot exist. So this is very common, very big argument people use. This book, in a layman way, looks at what does the Bible teach on that subject, for the reasons why people suffer. How does the Bible answer that? And there's a lot to say on that subject. Great book for you to have in your arsenal as well. And a way to help you get through suffering that happens in your own life. Whenever you're like, man, why God? Why did this happen? And the Bible has a lot to say on that subject. And then we got a lot of materials that are more culture war issues rather than just specifically Christian evidences. So things that, as the fundamentals have been eroded away in our country, existence of God and inspiration of the Bible and so forth, now we've got all these other issues that have sprung out of that we have to be ready to deal with. So environmentalism and homosexuality and abortion. And in pluralism, we have other religions coming about. So this book here, The Quran Unveiled, goes through in depth and shows you how the Quran, now you can know that the Quran is not inspired. It does not have those characteristics that it should have. This one here dealing with the question of illegal immigration, that's kind of a big topic today. And this series here is on the truth about what the founders of this country really believed and what this country was founded on. Very much a Christian nation originally when it was created. And as in spite of what is being taught now by many of the, especially the liberal universities and so forth, probably our most popular material really is the Silencing of God stuff. Brotherhood is very interested in that subject right now. Then we got materials that are more specifically church and doctrine oriented. What the Bible says about the Baptist Church, Lutheran Church, Catholic Church, Church of Christ. This one here, Surrendering to His Lordship, is looking at the principle of authority in the Bible, which of course is the principle that underlies why we do what we do in and out of worship. So looking at that subject in a very eloquent way. This book here, which is actually available for free on the free table back there, a few years ago, Richland Hills congregation out in Texas, which argued to be the numerically largest Church of Christ and the Brotherhood, decided to add instrumental music. This was, I guess, probably the first time it had happened. And the preacher, Rick Ashley, got up and did 2 or 3 sermons where he tried to give scriptural justification for that action. And even went into the Greek and everything. I mean, so he got really technical to try to prove his case. So this book is responding to all of that to show you the truth on that subject. Receiving the Gift of Salvation, a nice little booklet that talks about what the Bible says about how to receive the salvation that God offers. All right, and that is all for tonight. So just as a quick looking towards tomorrow, we're trying to systematically build the creation model. The first thing you have to do is show that there is a God, show you which God. So then the question is, what does that God say? What is the story that he tells us about history? And what evidence is there to back that? So what we're going to do in the next 2 sessions is lay out Genesis 1 through 11, and specifically looking at things that we've found in science that verify a lot of the things that you see in the Bible on these subjects. It's probably the most fun I've had is developing this stuff, because there's just so much that verifies what the Bible says. It's brilliant. It's fascinating how much is out there that gives us some insight scientifically into what has gone on in this planet in the past that God has of course worked out. Then we'll start responding to some charges that are made against the biblical model as stated in Genesis 1 through 11. So we'll answer common charges that are levied against us to try to say, nah, the biblical model doesn't work. It's unscientific. You can't make predictions with your model that can then be verified in nature. We'll answer that charge. And then we'll look at a lot at Bill Nye, the arguments he was making against Ken Ham in the Bill Nye-Ken Ham debate that happened a couple years back. He made a lot of specific allegations against the creation model, which I think deserves some time to make sure you're ready to respond to those. And then we'll end the seminar by looking at then the final question that I think is most important, and that is, given all of this information, why would someone want to become a Christian? In light of all of the stuff we have to deal with on this subject, why would somebody want to choose the Christian life and have what we have? All right, thank you again very much for your attention. Do we have anything else that needs to be said before we close it out? That's it. All right, thank you again for your attention. We'll see you tomorrow at 2 o'clock. 2 o'clock.